Welcome, friends. We are right at 7:30 Central, so I'm going to kick us off here. Welcome to our session this evening, Sovereignty is a Nonpartisan Issue, What Unites Us When Advocating in Solidarity with Tribal Nations, led by FCNL's wonderful Portia. To get us started, I just want to let you know that I'm Bobby Trice, and I serve Friends as the Quaker Outreach Coordinator at FCNL, and I'm here as just a secondary support person. And one quick thing before I turn things over to Portia, I hope folks wouldn't mind clicking on the link I've just put in the chat and filling out our FCNL event guest book. That's really helpful for us to show who's coming to our sessions. And one other piece of business before we get into the content is that part of why I'm here too is to serve as a process facilitator, because we're finding it's very important to attend to our process and our interactions with each other as part of our work of building beloved community. So I'm going to introduce a protocol called Oops Ouch, which is a protocol system that's been used in Pacific Yearly Meeting, North Pacific Yearly Meeting at FCNL, and in other Quaker and non-Quaker contexts. But the basics are, if during our session you feel injured by something that someone says, please feel free to write ouch in the chat. I'll give you the opportunity to then explain in the chat. I will then offer the opportunity for the friend responsible for that ouch to either clarify or simply apologize by writing oops in the chat. And I want to emphasize that ouch and oops are meant to be used for words that injure, not words that simply make one uncomfortable. And again, just a system in place so that we all have permission to name pieces of our process that may be causing harm, as again, part of our commitment to building the beloved community. Are there any questions about that before I turn things over to Portia? All right, I think we are ready then. Thank you so much for being here, friends, and welcome, Portia.
Thank you, Bobby. Hi, everyone. My name is Portia Shenandore-Wheelock. I manage the Native American Advocacy Program at FCNL. I've been on board since June, so still fairly new, but getting the hang of things. So much has happened since I've joined, actually, which I'm really excited to get into. But before we get into the policy part, I did want to, emphasize that a part of what I want to talk to you all about today is this spiritual process to allyship and advocacy, and really focus on, what unites us. Since, I'm not a Quaker myself, I am a citizen of the Oneida Nation. If you know much about the Six Nations or the Iroquois in kind of the New York State area, that's where my community is originally from. So I wanted to share a traditional Haudenosaunee prayer that's done before gatherings, before any meetings, because it really grounds ourselves in gratitude and reciprocity. And I just thought it'd be a good way to kind of find our common ground, right? We're all generally people of faith in this space. And I want to focus on what unites us. So this will take a couple of minutes, but whatever you do to get into that space to receive, prepare yourself to do that. And I'll run through the Thanksgiving address. And then afterwards, we can just spend a minute or two if you have any insights from that you'd like to share. We'll do that before we get into the policy part. So the Thanksgiving address is essentially greetings to the natural world. So today we have gathered and we see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. We are all thankful to our mother, the earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk upon her. It gives us joy that she continues to care for us as she has from the beginning of time. To our mother, we send greetings and thanks. We give thanks to all the waters of the world for quenching our thirst and providing us with strength. Water is life. We know its power in many forms: waterfalls and rain, mists and streams, rivers and oceans. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to the spirit of water. We turn our minds to all the fish. They were instructed to cleanse and purify the water. They also give themselves to us as food. We're grateful that we can still have clean water to drink. And we thank the fish and send our greetings to them. Now we turn to the vast fields of plant life. As far as the eye can see, the plants grow, working many wonders. They sustain many life forms. With our minds gathered together, we give thanks and look forward to seeing plant life for many generations to come. Now we turn to honor and thank all the food plants we harvest from the garden. Since the beginning of time, the grains, vegetables, beans, and berries have helped the people survive. Many other living things draw strength from food plants as well. We gather all the food plants together and send them a greeting of thanks. Now we turn to all the medicine herbs of the world. From the beginning, they were instructed to take away sickness. They are always waiting and ready to heal us. We are happy they are still among us, that those special few people still even remember how to use those plants for healing. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to the medicines and to the keepers of the medicines for their knowledge. Now we gather our minds and send greetings and thanks to all of the animal life in the world. They have many things to teach us as people. We are honored by them when they give up their lives so we may use their bodies as food for our people. We see them near our homes and deep in the forests. We are glad they're still here, and we hope that it will always be so. Now we turn our thoughts to the trees. The earth has many families of trees who have their own instructions and uses. Some provide us with shelter and shade, others with fruit, beauty, and other useful things. Many people of the world see a tree as a symbol of peace and strength. With one mind, we greet and thank the tree life. The birds. Now we turn our attention to them, who move and fly about over our heads. The Creator gave them beautiful songs. Each day they remind us to enjoy and appreciate life. The eagle was chosen to be their leader. To all the birds, from the smallest to the largest, we send our joyful greetings and thanks. We're also thankful to the powers we know as the four winds. We hear their voices in the moving air as they refresh us and purify the air we breathe. They help us bring the change of seasons. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the four winds. Now we turn to the thunderers. The thunder beings are our grandfathers, and they come from the west. With lightning and thundering voices, they bring with them the water that renews life. We are thankful that they keep those evil things underground with their loud thundering noise. We bring our minds together and send greeting and thanks to our grandfathers, the thunderers. Now we turn to the sun, our eldest brother. Each day without fail, he travels the sky from east to west, bringing the sun. Now we turn to our oldest grandmother, the moon, who lights the nighttime sky. She is the leader of women all over the world, and she governs the movement of the ocean tides. By her changing face, we measure time, and it is the moon who watches over the arrival of children here on Earth. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to our grandmother, the moon. Now we turn to the stars who are spread across the sky. We see them in the night, helping the moon to light the darkness and bringing dew to the gardens and growing things on Earth. When we travel at night, they guide us home. With our minds gathered, we send greetings and thanks to the stars. And just two more to go. And send our choicest words of greetings and thanks to the Creator. Now our minds are one. So just some closing words. When we end the Thanksgiving address, these greetings to the natural world, we always acknowledge that maybe we forgot something, we left something out. It was not our intention to do that. If something was forgotten, we leave it to each individual to send any greetings or thanks in your own way of anything that you thought should have been in there. And that's it. So that's how we start all of our meetings, where I'm in that space of gratitude. So we just wanted to open it up for,
I've been working towards removing the traditional Thanksgiving from my family's and my gatherings. And the last few years, I have not been in a traditional Thanksgiving setting because I know how much pain that causes the Indigenous people, and what a lie the colonialism and the story that we're told. So I found this prayer, and my daughter and I happened to be in Mexico on Thanksgiving, and we were sitting out in nature, and I brought the prayer out to read, and we read it together. And it just felt really right to be out in nature and to be reading this prayer and to be doing something that wasn't traditional. And, my hope is that I can continue with this new tradition and maybe find ways to incorporate not just Thanksgiving. It's a beautiful prayer. It's a beautiful acknowledgement. And I want to thank it's the Hoshani. Is it the Hoshani?
Haudenosaunee or Six Nations.
Haudenosaunee.
The easier way.
Yes, I would like to thank those people for this prayer.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I think when I think of Thanksgiving, this is what I think of. I forget that there's the mainstream holiday and everything. So we're reclaiming it, right? We're taking it back. And one of the reasons I think it's so important to share that prayer, and you'll see it published on the internet now.
To say that, Portia, I just wanted to say that with the renewed emphasis now on animal and human encounters out in the open, if you will, because the way we live and the way we move about, those encounters between animals and humans are becoming more and more frequent. We're reading about them every day, and many of the encounters lack for sure a friendliness. And as we know, many of them are fatal for one or the other. And your reverence for the animals, it seems to me, is right on, particularly in this time frame, that it's those encounters are something that we need to pray about and think about. And when they happen to me, or when they happen to us, to think quickly. I'm not using the right words here, but the words I can use right now are think quickly about alternatives to violence.
Absolutely. I think it also puts things in the context of, not just how we treat each other, but how we treat the world around us. And just cosmically, the fact that this planet exists with a layer of topsoil for us to grow food and to have animals and everything, that doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. That seems very, very intentional, and something was involved in creating this earth for us. So we need to take care of it. I definitely feel that environmentalism piece come through the Thanksgiving address. So we'll shift now to talking a little bit about who I am. I'm sure you're curious, and what brought me to FCNL. Why would a non-Quaker and an Indigenous person be called to do this type of work? So I want to get into that a little bit. So just so you have an understanding, I grew up on the Oneida Indian Reservation in Wisconsin, and I'll kind of use the words Indian and Indigenous sort of interchangeably, and that's not out of disrespect for that word Indian, which is definitely, the language is evolving. I just wanted to clarify that up front. It's still a legal term of art. There's Indian country, there's the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. It's definitely still a word we have to use, but in as much as possible in FCNL related writings, I try to use Indigenous or Native as much as I can, unless it's specifically that legal term of art. So growing up on the reservation in Wisconsin, I actually had a pretty unique experience even within that. I got to travel a lot. Our homelands are in upstate New York, which is where I am right now. And my dad, he was on the founding board of the Indigenous Environmental Network. You may have heard of them over the years. And because of that position, he didn't get paid a lot at the beginning. I think, they definitely have grants and stuff now, but back then they were just starting up. But he got to travel a lot, and he brought me along all over the country. We traveled specifically to different Native communities. So we were in Alaska, we got to go down to the Four Corners region. We went down to Brownsville, Texas. We were up in the Dakotas and Montana. So we really got to travel all over and see tribal communities. And I really got a better understanding of what Indian country is from those trips. What we have in common as tribal nations, but also what's different. So the things we have in common that I noticed, we are all treated by the federal government in a similar way. So there's really not a lot of, at least back then, there was not a lot of communication between the federal government and tribal nations. They didn't really care about hearing from tribes directly what they needed. And obviously it's difficult to solve a problem if you don't know what those problems are, and who best to tell you what the problems are and what the solutions are than the people experiencing them. So I really learned a lot about how the government impacts daily life for Native people in this country. I'm not sure that that's the same for all Americans, but it's definitely the smallest decision really can impact tribes. Government shutdowns, our pharmacies shut down, but so much just halts because of the relationship and the responsibilities between the federal government and tribal nations. So for me, all that impressed on me is the federal government deals with us with law and policy, and I consider those kind of languages. And because those are the tools they use to deal with us, more of us need to understand that language. So that's why I decided to study law and policy. And that might seem like an odd thing to some people. It definitely puts me in a weird position because, I am a Native person and I'm walking in that world, but I'm also in the mainstream world trying to advocate for us. So, I'm kind of caught in between a lot of the times. But I always like to remind people that, since contact, we've always had delegates that we would send to talk with settlers, to negotiate treaties and to find common solutions to our problems. So in that context, being an advocate is not anything new. So I do really see my role and my contribution as kind of fulfilling that kind of similar advocate or delegate kind of role. So I have had a lot of experience on different levels of the federal government. I have worked for my tribal community before. And throughout those different experiences, I really see more value in working on a national level. I can make a bigger impact and tap into addressing all those common problems that I saw when I got to travel all over the country with my dad. So that's kind of, what led me down this path. So how to figure out how to do all of that. In undergrad, I interned with Senator Kohl, K-O-H-L of Wisconsin. I worked in 2 federal agencies, the Social Security Administration, and I did a little bit of international work with USAID in the State Department. So while I was in law school, I kind of focused on that a little more because that's more recent. I was able to clerk with the Department of Justice in the Office of Tribal Justice. And that was a really great experience to see, what that relationship is like between the federal government and tribal nations. See other Native people in government. There's a lot of Native people working for the federal government. I got to learn about their roles, how they contribute, and what it's like to be a federal employee, but also be a tribal citizen. The most frustrating thing I learned out of that experience was you're actually not allowed to work on your own issues for your own tribe because it's considered a bias, even though you have a lot of unique contributions that you could make. A friend of mine that I was working with, she was from the Wind River Reservation, and we literally had to close the door on her so she couldn't hear us talking about a case that involved her tribal nation. I just thought that was so ridiculous because all of us that worked so hard to go through school, which is challenging for Native people to go into Western institutions of higher education, we do all that work to get the credentials, right? And then we do that work to try to help our people, and we have unique insights that can contribute to that work, but then we're not allowed to work on the issues for our tribal nations. So that kind of showed me, maybe working within the system isn't going to have the biggest impact for my people because I'm not going to be allowed to work on those issues. So I thought it might be better to work from the outside, but I wasn't exactly sure how to do that. So I'll go back a little bit into my relationship with the Quaker community specifically. For me, that started in 2013 on the Two-Row Wampum campaign. Some of you may have heard of it. It was a celebration of the 200th anniversary. So that treaty was between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch. And the Dutch consulate actually greeted us at the end of the trip. It was a 2-week paddle down the Hudson River in upstate New York, down to New York City. And along the way, we had, education campaigns. It was partly honor the treaties and partly kind of an environmental justice sort of effort. So at the time in New York State, the governor was obviously that's not exactly how things turned out, but that reflection of working together and working alongside each other. I think that's what allyship is, and that's one of our longest standing relationships with Quakers in New York kind of has those kind of sentiments. So a lot of the allies on that Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy, some were neutral, some sided with the British, but essentially it fractured and destroyed our Confederacy, and it fractured the Oneida Nation into 3 pieces. So we have a community in New York, which is our original homelands. A community broke off and went to Canada, and another group went to Wisconsin. So talking to them, you know, about the consequences of what Quakers did when interacting with our people historically. And a part of that comes down to our gender roles. So for us, women had the power. They had the power to vote their leadership in, the power to marry whoever they wanted, and they owned title to all the land. We were in charge of our agriculture from your mother. So kind of, I think it's an interesting thing to talk about because it's kind of the real life impacts of Quaker interactions, intentions, right? So sometimes we might have the best of intentions, but we also have to remember what those real life consequences are, because those impacts can be significant. And ever since it's hard to do in the mainstream American culture now, but we're hanging on. So essentially the Quakers we had met in New York, you know, they wanted to do something to try to repair that relationship and try to make that right. It's not a lot of land, it's just under 30 acres, but it's so significant to the Oneida people because it's in the name, we started a nonprofit to receive the land. So it's in the name of the women. The women are holding title again for all of the Oneida people to use it. And none of our 3 fractured governments has control over that land. So it truly is returned to the people. And I think that was really important to the Quaker women that were involved with this. So those are the 2 stories that I just really wanted to share. So you understand, you know, why a non-Quaker Indigenous person would be gravitated towards working at FCNL. So since those interactions, you know, I learned more about who Quakers are, you know, what you all do, and this opportunity at FCNL just really kind of presented itself out of nowhere in the middle of the pandemic. So I think we have maybe 2 or 3 minutes, if you have any questions, you know, kind of about my spiritual journey, just kind of getting to know each other type of questions. We can do that for a couple minutes.
Are you residing on your tribal lands now?
No, I'm about an hour away from that land that was returned to us. So it's close enough that I can go out there, you know, whenever I'm needed. So actually last week we went out there to bring more Oneida people to meet the two Quaker women and to walk the land. It was really a safe haven for us during the pandemic. We went out there to go camping a lot. We tapped maple trees. We planted a 3 Sisters garden, which is corn, beans, and squash. My partner hunted out there quite a bit during the winter. So it's really just been, you know, it's just a little small slice, right? But it's really just been this this beautiful safe haven for us, and we're just so grateful and excited to have that. It's meant a lot. It really has.
I think we might have time for one more question in this section. Yeah, John.
Portia, are there, as you have come in contact with the Quaker history and background, are there sections of the history of the Religious Society of Friends that are problematic for you and your people that you can share?
Oh, sure. I mean, historically, it's a complicated relationship, right? I think the most troubling part is the land grab. That was definitely controversial. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on the name. But there were some agreements signed for land that, you know, whether there was forgery, it was definitely not an honest agreement when those transactions were taking place. So I think that was one of the most sharing that, but it's done a lot of damage. It's absolutely has done a lot of damage to our societies, to our culture. It just doesn't fit, right? But there's definitely a resurgence, I would say, over the last 30 to 40 years of reclaiming our identity and culture, and kind of getting back on track to what our original instructions and what our teachings are. Is called NIWRC. That's the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. They specifically focus on violence issues, which I'll get into in a minute. We also work with the leads of the Native American Caucus very closely. That's Representative Tom Cole and Rep. Sharice Davids. So Cole has been in there in Congress forever. And is irrelevant. It certainly helps when we're pushing for our issues, but it is irrelevant because tribal issues, they're the law of the land. In the U.S. Constitution, it acknowledges that treaties with Indian nations are the law of the land. So all members of Congress, whether they have tribes in their districts or not, they all have for bipartisanship. And I always make that argument, you all have this responsibility to tribal nations. So I'll just go quickly over one issue that FCNL has worked on for a really long time because we had a huge win not too long ago, last month. Actually, I think it might be almost exactly a month. So you may have heard of the missing and murdered Indigenous people to tribal nations. And that is one of those issues where, again, we advocate in solidarity with tribal nations and tribal organizations because they know best what they need. And we're really proud to have a win in the current climate where it's been so hard to get some wins these days. Another bill that we're working on right now. So next, I kind of wanted to shift a little bit into what we're working on, really prioritizing for the rest of the year, just because I want to make sure we have time to get into more of the details and leave some time for questions and answers. So you may have heard about a truth and healing and reconciliation type of effort through their government several years ago now, like at least 15 years ago now. And one thing that had come out of that was cataloging all the Indian boarding schools that they had, hearing from survivors, and like you may have heard in the news, they're finding bodies now. They're doing ground penetrating radar searches of these former school grounds, and the body count has reached over 10,000 so far, and they've only searched a fraction of the schools. So if you're not very familiar with that part of our collective history, I'll just go into that a little bit, because Canada's boarding school era was right after ours in the US. So essentially it was an assimilation policy administered by the federal government and sponsored by the federal government, but also administered through churches, and Quakers did run a number of these schools. So the point of the assimilation policy was, after the genocide of Indigenous people here didn't work, which genocide rarely does, it's very difficult to wipe out, and Native people were removed to reservations, this was still considered a quote unquote Indian problem. So their solution was to create these assimilation camps or concentration camps to indoctrinate Native children into the American way of life. This process was incredibly violent at times. You were punished if you spoke your native language. Your hair was cut off. Your body was scrubbed raw. You were forced to, wear non-native clothing. So essentially removing a lot of children died, in part to starvation and illnesses, but largely in part to violence as well. So kind of the mentality coming out of this this effort was kill the Indian, save the man. You may have heard that quote. That basically sums up the policy: kill the Indian, save the man. So break down these little children and rebuild them into what you would consider contributing members of society. That was the goal. So obviously we know that's wrong now. And you may have heard of the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. That was one of the first major schools, and he kind of designed this policy. So his position was, Natives, they're worth saving, they're worthy of US citizenship, we need to indoctrinate them and fold them into our society. And of course, we know that there's flaws in that kind of thinking. But at the same time, if you put it in the context of what was going on at that time, his peers were saying the opposite. Native people are not even worthy of life. We need to exterminate them. So for as problematic as his position was, you have to kind of, some people say, he was doing the best thing in that situation. But again, I want to go back to intention and real life consequences. So regardless of whether those were good intentions at the time, the consequences were pretty dire, and we're still feeling those consequences on reservations today. Any statistic you want to throw out there, poverty, violence, drugs, suicide amongst young people, all of those things are very prevalent on reservations and in tribal communities today. And there's a direct link to the boarding school era. And I say that not to blame all of our problems on federal policy, but just because people do have personal responsibility, right, for your own actions. But just to put it in that context, if you can imagine these several generations now going through this, being taken away from your parents at a young age and not knowing if you'll ever see them again, that's traumatic. And then you go to this school where you receive no affection or love from any of the adults or any of your peers around you. Everything you're experiencing is to crush you and break you down. So say you survive that. Some of them didn't, but say you survive and you graduate and maybe you go home. You don't speak your language. So your family and your community, you might not even be able to talk to them. Even if you can, they don't understand you because you're a completely different person now, right? You're becoming American. You don't speak your language. Yeah, you're essentially an American at that point. But the border towns, to the white people around the reservation, you're still an Indian, right? You're not accepted and valued in their space, in the non-native space, or in your home tribal community. So how does that affect you as a person, as a young adult? How do you then find a partner? And given all that you experienced as a child with abuse at that school, how do you love your partner? How do you love your own children once you have them? So you can see how that breaks everything down right there. And it starts a generation who doesn't know how to love. There's no birth control at the time, so they're having children, but they don't know how to love their partner or their children. And that can create cycles of violence, right? And this is linked to that missing and murdered issue, which I talked about before with the Violence Against Women Act. Domestic violence, child molestation, alcohol and drug abuse, suicide, all of that is kind of linked to this shift from tribal nations to reservations to American society. And I want to just kind of make the issue prevalent so that you understand literally every Native person living today, every Native family has the link and a connection that can be traced back to these schools. I don't know anyone who doesn't have this in their family line. So where do we go from there? That's the historical context, and we have contemporary problems connected to it. So, what do we do about that? And there is definitely a shift. I don't want it to all be, kind of this gloom, right? There's definitely been a shift. You may have heard of the American Indian movement in the 70s that was inspired by the civil rights movement. I feel like ever since that time, there's been a shift from really being ashamed of being Indigenous and Native, stemming from those schools, to shifting to being proud. And a large part of that healing is culture. Culture is really foundational to grieving and to healing from all of these things. So those schools try to terminate culture and language and spirituality. But there's this resurgence going on in reclaiming language and ceremony and culture. A lot of that is gone. That's a part of cultural genocide. But there were folks that hung on to a lot of our teachings and did them in secret. They were illegal until 1978. You couldn't even practice Native religions and spirituality. We had to have our own Freedom of Religion Act in 1978. So a lot of it is gone, but a lot of it has also survived. And I will acknowledge, there are some bad things on reservation life. It's not always easy, but there's also a lot of beautiful things. And this cultural resurgence is one of the most beautiful things to see and to witness. So a lot of that is coming from younger people. They're a generation and a half or so from the boarding school era at minimum. So they're kind of leading that reclamation, right, of that movement from moving away from being shamed and kind of shifting into being proud of who they are. So for my generation, I'll talk a little bit about that. My generation is after Indian gaming. My nation started to get money from the gaming era. So much changed. We got a brand new shiny school, a new healthcare clinic. Our road was paved in front of our house. All of that was very new. This self-determination era, it brought in so much funding. And a part of that was for our schools. Language and culture became a part of our curriculum. So if you can kind of imagine so my great-grandmother went to the Carlisle boarding school. My mom went to the Flandreau boarding school. And my older sister went to a boarding school in Washington State. So you can kind of see this shift, right? Over time from trying to destroy our language to, for me, it was being taught in our schools for the first time. So it shows how much destruction can be done with policy in a short amount of time, but also how much you can kind of shift and change that in a short amount of time as well. So I don't know if we have time, Bobby, if you wanted to jump in a little bit and talk about the Quaker role in that, because that's not something I can speak very strongly to, and some of our efforts on that.
Yeah, I can definitely jump in. Quakers were involved in setting up and running a lot of these Indian boarding schools. So she has wonderful workshops and a lot of writing and research that's accessible on the web that I would just commend to you, because it's a really fabulous self-education resource. We also, I'll share at the end, but we do have some recommended actions to support.
So let's see, we have, how much time do we have? About 15 minutes or so. I forget, Bobby, do we have enough time to go into questions for a bit?
Yeah, we can definitely go into questions for a bit.
Okay, so I have plenty of stories I can share, personal stories, but I wanted to make sure we had time for questions, and then, maybe we can shift back into some more stories after that. I just want to make sure that
I, as a Caucasian settler person, can't pronounce something that I shouldn't attempt to pronounce it. And what I'm wondering is there some kind of resources that someone like me could access in terms of helping me understand and learn how to pronounce correctly Indigenous words, names
like
of
that?
tribal nations, your name. You said your name so fast, and I have to write it down phonetically. So that's what I'm stumbling with.
Yeah, I think at the root of that really is, what's your relationship and connection to the community you're interacting with, right? The tribal community, or if it's an individual like myself. I think, for someone like me, especially in a space like this, I kind of open up myself up to sharing myself and my story, and it might be a little more comfortable, right, to ask something like that. But I think it goes back to relationship. So I don't think it's inappropriate to ask for clarification or anything like that, but it kind of depends on how well you know someone. And I would point again to the Quakers I've met in 2013 and 2019. That relationship took a long time to build trust, essentially. And once you kind of create that connection, then you can kind of have that sort of free-flowing communication and be like, hey, I'm just coming from a place of ignorance here, but can you explain this to reciprocity? Make sure you're not just always taking, make sure you're reciprocating in some fashion. I think that really means a lot to a lot of people. We're so used to kind of that invasion, right? And that's why people might come off kind of wanting to protect it. But there's a time and space to build that connection and open the door. And And generally names aren't passed down. You're kind of, you watch someone's characteristics and see how they are as a child, and then you get their name put through. But a part of my name, I feel like, is planting seeds. She plants gardens, planting seeds in other people and thoughts, right? And kind of just getting it. I'm not telling you what to think or how to feel, but just, planting that. Think about, type it, and we can come back to you. Okay, sorry. Is it Almeda? Am I saying that right?
Almeida.
Almeida?
I
Go
didn't
ahead.
mean to step on them. I'm sorry. I didn't
Oh, no,
hear.
that's okay.
Okay. I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you for the huge amount of enlightenment that you gave us in this very small time frame.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that acknowledgement. Bobby and I did a lot of work to prepare for this call, and it's like, how do you fit all of this into an hour and 15 minutes, right? To build connection, and that's why I wanted to start with the prayer. I think that's a good foundation for us to go from. And our work doesn't have to end here. In a minute, we'll get into what you all can do going forward if you're interested. There's very easy little things you can do, and then there's bigger work, right, to be done. And that's kind of just something you have to feel called to do. Not everyone is, and that's okay too. Absolutely. Any other thoughts or questions, and then we'll kind of transition back. I was hoping to hear from John and Gail. I'm hoping we can figure that out. Okay, well, and again, I'm happy to share more stories, but I do want to make sure we talk a little bit about, what some of our goals are for the rest of the year with the Native American program, and to what type of actions you can take, if any less, for what can truly be accomplished for the rest of this Congress. So the boarding school issue, there is a bill, the Truth and I gotta stop saying reconciliation, that's Canada. The Truth and Healing Commission bill. And that was introduced by, again, the co-leads of the Native American Caucus, Rep. Cole and Rep. David. Supportive of this bill. We're putting a lot of our resources behind it. But like I said, there isn't much time left to get the bill passed, but that's okay. If it doesn't pass this Congress, it'll just be reintroduced again. This is the second time it's been introduced, but we do need to move the bill further along in the process. Education is a big part of it. So the missing and murdered issue, that's been ongoing since contact, and it really only came to mainstream attention in the last 10 years. But it's because of folks, educating people, spreading awareness, writing op-eds, really elevating that issue. We kind of need to do the same thing for the boarding sign-on. It was just not politically, wasn't a good move, right? And she puts herself out there a lot for a lot of different issues. She'll go against the grain with her party. But I truly believe that advocacy groups pushing to support that bill helped her change her mind. And we do have a strong advocacy group, the Alaska Crew, but it is still there. And I think this issue in particular needs that voice behind it. So I want to talk a little bit, we have 15 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about actions that you can take up if you feel called to do so. There are some very easy things that can be done that won't take too much of your time that we would encourage you to do. One is going on our website. There's the most important things going on in the administration and on the Hill. And I put that together in sort of a newsletter, and it's 600 words or less. So there's not a lot of space to put a lot in there, but I kind of, it's just something that you can read every month to stay engaged. You can sign up for that. Again, that's a monthly newsletter. It goes out at the end of every month. And then I just want of Quaker history. It's part of all of our history, just by being in this country. And I think I have an example I can put in the chat, just so you get an idea of some of the things that other meetings are doing. And then, like Bobby said, I've almost forgot to mention letters to the editor. getting some national press on the issue is that education piece. So op-eds, letters to the editor, any sort of thing you feel called to do to elevate that issue, any of that would be helpful. It really does make a huge difference. And then I wanted to mention what Bobby had said about Paula Palmer and Geraldine Dakota. So they, and we'll put that in the chat as well, they run a peace team called Toward Right Relationship. Just gonna put the meeting in the meeting note, or the minute in the chat. So I hope if you haven't already taken one of their workshops, if you want to take this information back to your meeting, you know, let them know that's an option. They have online workshops, they have in-person ones, you know, whatever would kind of work for you, but I would suggest taking a look at that. Thank you, Bobby. I wasn't sure if I'd have time to try to find it. I think that would be a great way, kind of like what you did tonight, to get more information. They'll go kind of a deeper dive into, you know, the Quaker perspective and everything. Both of them, I believe both of them are Quaker, right, Bobby, or is it just Paula? I want to say both of them are.
I think it may just be Paula, but
maybe? Okay.
Yeah.
I know Geraldine does do some of the advocacy teamwork, it seems like. I remember meeting with her a while ago about that. So again, there's so many perspectives to come at with policy. You have the tribal coalitions that we work with. We have interfaith coalitions that we work with, because Quakers are not the only denomination that was involved with this. So coming at it from all these different angles, I think that's really going to elevate the issue and accomplish those goals I laid out for the rest of this Congress, that are realistically achievable. We do have about 10 minutes left if there are questions. Otherwise, go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in really quick to say I've dropped some of the links that Portia has been sharing about in the chat, so plenty of resources there. I also sent a PDF file of an action sheet that we've put together for yearly meetings and Friends meetings around the country, because it's a huge part of our issue focus and campaign for the next year. So as yearly meetings are having sessions all summer, our staff are going to be presenting this as kind of our main ask for Quakers to help us out with. So taking any of these actions, big or small, is actually contributing to a much larger Quaker campaign that we're starting to organize. And one other piece on that I want to mention is that our Young Adult Advocacy Corps program is actually also going to be focusing on this bill for 10 months from August until June. And so they will also help organize, up to 20 young adult organizers will help organize in their local communities, supporting this bill and doing a lot of the same actions. So it's, to me, really exciting that we're having so many different, in the Quaker world, from young adults, from tribal nations and coalitions, all kind of coming together around this focus for the next year. And I'm just really excited because I think we're really going to be able to push this forward, and can't wait to have some of you join us.
Portia, what are some of the other faith groups that are aligned with us about this? You mentioned that there were other faith groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I lead the Washington Interreligious Staff Communities Native American Working Group, and the Episcopal Church and the Jesuits, the Catholics, are just a couple of like the strongest voices that are consistently showing up to do the work. I think a big part of it is their followers are interested in the issue, so they keep asking, they keep elevating it, right? So their leadership is looking at it. One of their questions is getting a better understanding of their own history and the role that they played in it. I think that that's a gap in knowledge, right? That a lot of folks are trying to get a better understanding of. So there's a lot of work to do, and some of that is internal and a personal reflection on, you know, my faith played a role in X, Y, and Z, and what does that mean, you know, and how do I reconcile that? That I think one of the biggest things to point out with the faith groups is those actions of that time, those are not consistent with your teachings, right? All of us, all of our spiritual and our faith teachings are about peace and are about love. And that is not what took place at those schools that these faith groups ran. So I think that's one of the things that might kind of help start that conversation. I think it's not just the survivors and their descendants that went to these schools that have to deal with the consequences. I think we all need to look inward and deal with those consequences, right? And we all need to heal from it. I think that's sort of the joint part of this, and why this issue is different than the other issues we work on in the Native American portfolio.
And I'd like to add, our monthly meeting is in the middle of a study that was developed by the Mennonites. They have a curriculum dismantling the doctrine of discovery. So I know that they have also been involved.
Yes, the doctrine of discovery is so problematic. You may have heard there was a lot of news, was it last week or the week before? A delegation, mostly of Canadians, but I do know a few people from the US side, First Nations people, went to the Vatican and had a meeting with the Pope, and some sort of apology came out of that, which I was very surprised by, because the Pope, several popes have been very hesitant to apologize and to acknowledge this part of our history. And it's a very progressive Pope, so maybe that's the difference, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what that anything coming from the Vatican means to all of you, but I do think it's a significant step in kind of, one, elevating this issue, but kind of showing the harm, right? And I feel like there's been a hesitancy for a long time from the Vatican, from the federal government, to ever apologize to Indigenous people, because it's some sort of acknowledgement of harm. And I think they're worried about consequences by making that, that acknowledgement. And an apology wouldn't fix everything anyways, but it does start the healing for some people. For some people, it means something. For others, an apology wouldn't be enough. You have to take action, right? So you're gonna hear different responses from all of Indian country, because always keep that in mind. We're not, one homogenous blob. Like, we're very, very different, unique people across the board. So just keep that in mind as well as you hear about this issue. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. So if there's anything else you want to ask, or just feel called to share or say. One final thought I wanted to mention about the action campaign. Not to brag in comparing our issue areas across FCNL, but I feel like there's so much interest in this issue. We've had over 18,500 letters sent to the Hill from folks like yourself. And that's not including handwritten letters that Emma did. If you remember, Bobby, she had a campaign of handwritten letters from some of the Quaker meetings. So if we could round that up, I'd probably say closer to like 19,000 letters have been sent to the Hill pushing for this issue. And that's huge. I know some organizations, they don't get as much community action, like some of the tribal organizations. It's hard to get folks to engage. They might have a couple hundred. So I just wanted to elevate that, and you all do a lot of great work in your advocacy. Even something as simple as a letter really does make a big difference.
So does your work make a difference? And I want to push to the other participants. I went to Paula Palmer's workshop, I don't know, about 2 years ago, and it's some kind of fire got lit. And I would highly recommend going to Geraldine's workshop. It's not offered as often, but towards Friends Peace Teams Toward Right Relations. Google that and you'll see the list of all of the educational offerings that they have, and resources. It's endless.
Yeah, there's one coming up in 2 weeks, kind of the general one that they do. And I saw they're doing some specific ones on boarding schools and
Yes,
Quakers reckoning with that, and then kind of explaining the intergenerational trauma that goes along with that. Yeah, they do a lot of great work.
So do you.
Thank you.
And we're actually going to invite them to do a panel event next month with Portia, and hoping that will all come together too. So we'll make sure to let you all know when that happens, bringing these kind of two pieces of historical, self-educational, reflective work and policy advocacy into conversation with one another.
Great.
Portia, I just want to thank you for being brave enough to be with a bunch of Quakers, and we love your perspective. And personally, I want to instill trust in the Indigenous people and be a part of this, because it weighs heavy on my heart, and just want to be there, want to be supportive, want to make it right. So wrong. It's been so wrong. And I see that, and it's important that others see that. And this bill is very important. We're actually writing a minute during our business meeting. The Peace and Social Concerns is bringing it forward as a minute. And then, of course, we'll share the link you just gave us to the campaign itself, so that we can get people to start writing letters.
That is great. Yes, and please share your minutes with us. Cole's office in particular has asked if we can collect those or have them on a website or do something with them so they can show support. He's really big in getting his colleagues, especially his Republican colleagues, on board. So that would be a tremendous help, absolutely.
Who would we send it to?
I think Bobby put the email in the chat, quakers@fcnl.org. And those will go on our website.
Got it.
Karen, I saw you had wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say that I was really excited to hear that the advocacy teams are going to take this issue up. I think that'll just really push that forward and really highlight it, not only on Congress, but definitely within our own Quaker communities. I think the efforts of the advocacy teams have been tremendous, I know, in our area. So I'm excited to hear that. And yes, thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing your information. I was born and raised in Hawaii, so I'm well aware of Native issues and its impact on just everyday life. So thank you for bringing this awareness to everyone here.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, sorry, John. The natives in Hawaii have so often been left out of federal legislation. And I do feel like, especially with Senator Schatz of Hawaii, and he's the chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, he's really elevating Native Hawaiians to make sure they are included as much as possible. And because they're not technically a federally recognized tribe, that's why they're often left out. But he's finding other ways to include them as tribal organizations, or different ways, tactics to make sure, because they have a lot of the same needs, and they deserve that. And there were day schools, not overnight schools in Hawaii, but same policies. So they're absolutely deserving, of the same recognition.
Right.
Yes, go ahead, John.
I just wanted to say that the friends and the attenders here gathered for our yearly meeting represent the state of Oklahoma. Well, and Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana. But if you think of Oklahoma, you think of Indian tribes, Indian affairs, perhaps more strongly than other states. And so sure enough, in some of our meetings or worship groups in the past, there have been people who have been employed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs and who have had, I'm sure, and I'm just pulling this from memory now, so I'm not sure of its complete accuracy, but who have had their hands in the mix with Indian tribes and groups in thinking of policy, in thinking of things that could reform things, make things better. I can remember personally talking with one of these older gentlemen who's now deceased, and his story is about how he was so happy to do the work, but how very challenging it was to be in right relationship, as the phrase you've used earlier this evening. So anyway, that's Oklahoma. That's part of our Quaker past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big commitment, you know, and that's why we give you a lot of options of different actions you can take. But to build relationship and to write relationship, that's a lot of work. It certainly is an effort, and I'm grateful for our allies that have stepped up to do that work. I wish we could say we can get everything done on our own, but we really can't. You know, we do need allyship as a small population in this country. And Oklahoma, of course, there's so much going on right now with the McGirt decision and everything. So definitely keeping an eye on everything in Oklahoma for sure. Well, we are over time, but I do want to share, you know, if you need anything from FCNL, please reach out. I'm sorry, John and Gail, that we couldn't hear your question, but if you want to email, we can connect. That would be great to get in touch. And thank you so much for being present. I think, you know, that's a part of it too, is what we show up for and what we feel called to do. So I'm very grateful that you all came tonight. So thank you. Is there anything else, Bobby, before we go?
I think we're all set. Thank you so much, friends. This has been a lovely session to share with you all. I'm so glad to have seen you all, and can't wait to eventually come to sessions in person some year. Yeah, it'll happen. It'll happen.
Right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You.